Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the May From Resilience to Restoration public Zoom. We have two wonderful guest speakers tonight. I'll let them give themselves a proper introduction, but I'll just say briefly, we are welcoming Rev. Dallas Conyers, who is the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Manager for the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, SCEN. We're also welcoming Jan Booher, who is, and I've got to get this straight, Director at Unitarian Universalist Justice Florida Climate Resilience Ministry. But please introduce yourselves and your topic of eco grief and climate migration.
Well, excuse me, everybody. I'm Dallas Conyers. I work with SIN. I also do international work with the United States Climate Action Network. And as Kyle mentioned, I am an ordained minister. So my look is a little bit, my outlook encompasses the intersection of not only lived experience, but of being on this world at this time, but also faith. It encompasses policy work, and it just encompasses my heart, quite frankly, in all the things that eco grief and migration deal with. And I can't wait to get a little bit more into that. Jan, you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. So I'm working with UUJF here in Florida. I'm working with all of you on the Gulf Coast area, and I'm working internationally with Health Initiatives Foundation Incorporated, which has as one of its initiative Resilient American Communities. And all of my work is focused on working on whole of society responses that are parallel to whole of government responses, and that those whole of society responses are robust and that they have as many people at the table on that side as possible. So I'm really happy that this group of people is working that way across the Gulf South and bringing in so many different partners. I think that the more voices that we have, the more likely we are to find solutions that work.
Oh, forgot to unmute myself. Welcome, team. I'd like to introduce one other person as well. We are greatly expanding our capacity at People's Justice Council. And so we, so much so, in fact, that we have not one, but two Aaliyahs. I've already introduced Aaliyah Smith, our policy manager. Now I would like to introduce Aaliyah Allman, our outreach specialist. Aaliyah, if you're where you can just say hello, would love for the team to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to getting to know everybody. I hope y'all had a good day and have a good rest of your day. And I'm excited to learn.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Aaliyah is undergoing some really intense training right now with Kathleen Kirkpatrick that some of you may know. But without getting us too far off topic, I would like to and this is a nice informal session. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand. You're welcome to unmute yourself and talk. But I was kind of thinking that Rev. Dallas might start us off, and then Jan would go second. But I'm open to suggestion.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I'm rearing to go. So, and I don't know where this terrible fake Southern accent came from. It happens to me sometimes. I'm from the North. I've just been here for about 12 years. So climate grief. Anybody not heard of eco grief or climate grief before? Please raise your hand. And I'm a true and born preacher. So I ask for participation. So if you can talk back and all that stuff, emojis and signals and all that stuff is cool. But anybody not heard of eco grief or climate grief? Awesome. So ego grief is, as we know, it's thinking about things that we are losing, because that's what grief is, loss. A lot of us pigeonhole grief into just this idea of somebody dying. But the fact of the matter is there's so many different types of grief. There's loss of life, but there's also loss of home. There's also loss of livelihood. There's also the loss of being able to earn your own livelihood due to sudden disability or inability, or the place you worked no longer exists because it got wiped out in the storm, or the place you work going out of business because it's not climately feasible or usable and it got canceled, right? There's loss of a loved one through a loss of a relationship, right? We break up, we make up, but even when you go through a relationship ending, that's a loss in and of itself. Then there's also loss of childhood home. They say you can never go back home, but imagine if you really can't go back home because the tornado tore it up. And so you can't go back to the park that you remember laughing in. You can't take your child to drive past the house that you grew up in. You have loss of, loss of hopes and memories that you wanted to have for your children, right? The big four, I've never been on a safari. I've never been to Africa. That's the big thing, go on a big African safari, but it might be that by the time I get there, I won't be able to see any gorillas in the wild because the big four are going extinct faster than most of the other animals on our planet. And so if I can't see the big four, what does that mean for my children? I once read a book where they were referring to the stars, but the people had to move underground into dome settlements, so they had never seen the stars themselves. So this loss of being able to pass on life as we know it. Climate and eco grief are so heavy because it's one of the only forms of grief that encompasses every other type of grief. Every other type of grief that I've listed can be associated or caused by what is happening to our world through climate change. And just like every other grief can be encompassed with everything that we're doing, what we're experiencing, unlike regular grief, where you have stages of grief and you have the opportunity to work your way through denial and anger and acceptance and bargaining and then acceptance. You can hit acceptance, but there's always going to be another form of loss involved in climate change that takes you right back. So it breaks the pattern of usual grief where you have a reasonable expectation of reaching the end of the process. And that's one of the reasons why people dealing with eco grief are dealing with something that, number one, it's a whole deeper kind of denial. Some people don't even want to think about climate change as being real. Like, there is no such thing, because if I have to think about that, I don't want to live anymore. And unfortunately, that's a reality that many children are choosing. Their children, suicide rates are going up higher now than at any other rate in time because of eco grief, because they're like, I have no future. What's the point? And so this is a new, totally different entity. And it impacts us more than in our mental health. It impacts us in our will to live. And why is that more than just our mental health? Because it means that, are we willing to participate in developing new ways of living? If you won't even think about climate change because eco grief is too heavy, are you willing to think about the ways that you can help move back climate change? Are you willing to think about the ways to redo your neighborhood? Are you willing to think about new technologies? Are you willing to think about new laws? Are you willing to fight for laws that give you rebates for going to renewable energy products, right? If you are steeped in grief and depression over that kind of grief, are you willing to get up and go to work the next day? Does it seem worth it to save for a retirement account? Does it seem worth it to take care of your body if you don't expect to be able to live with free autonomy in 20 years? Climate grief is different because we are looking at a world where people are making their decisions for the rest of their lives because everything that they are living in is impacted by this thing that is causing them grief. So they can't walk away from home and leave the source of the grief. They can't change their job. They can't change their relationship. The source of this grief is literally everywhere around us. You go shopping in a supermarket and either the good or product that you're used to seeing is no longer there, or now you have understanding that the good or the product that you love is actually harming you. Both of those are grievous things. I hate when I shop. Sometimes I'm like, I finally understood when they say ignorance is bliss. Because sometimes I walk around and I'm like, God, I wish I didn't know that. I wish I didn't know that this very easy and convenient thing to just pick up the supermarket bag and take my butt home is actually something that I should not show other people to do. And I have to model remembering to bring my cloth bag, or model paying the extra $1 and change to buy the canvas bag, right? Because if I don't do something about it, then I'm contributing to the problem, but I'm skipping a little bit ahead. So understanding the influence of this grief and understanding that it not only affects our mental state, it affects our mentality on making changes. It affects our will to fight. It affects our willingness to go ahead and make changes in our own lives and changes in society as a whole to help stop the problem. Because when you're grieving, you're often tired, right? Some people they get into that, I just can't do anything. I don't want to do anything. And again, since this has no end to the cycle, people can just stay tired, right? It affects worker retention. It affects literally everything that you can think of. It affects policy making. It affects education. It affects children willingness to pay attention to school. It affects people's ability to take care of themselves and eat proper diets. So, and it affects also how we treat others. So when you think about the person who is in migration themselves, and they're migrating because they lost their home, and they lost their home because there was a war. But the war was caused because of a drought, a years-long drought where everybody's food and water dried up. And so they allowed in militants because the militants brought food and water. And now they're embroiled in this war. This is the story of Syria, right? This is now the story of Sudan. This is the story of Mali, right? So many places, we just think of them. Why so many civil wars? Because of drought. Climate caused war. And now they have to leave their homes because not only is it not safe because of war, but it's not livable because there's no food and no water. And then they go somewhere else to live and people treat them like pariahs, like they are an infestation, like they should just figure it out on their own and stop taking up their resources, which is not fair because, again, if they're coming to America, we're more likely to have created the pollution and the emissions that cause their drought. And they can't articulate any of that because they have experienced loss of life, loss of home, loss of relationships, loss of relationship to place, loss of livelihood, loss to freedom. Do you know how many people go into other forms of slavery and slavery outright because of climate change devastation and not being able to support themselves and keep their family safe? All these losses, these people are grieving and they've reached this new place and everybody's just looking at them saying, I don't want you. Why didn't you get your country together? And they're looking at you like, your country is the reason why my country was the way it is. Your country's policy and your country's pollution is the reason why my country is in war. And so now we have people who, at home where we are, they're just learning about eco grief. They're just learning about climate change. They're just now, some of us are just now experiencing the brutality of climate change on a regular basis, and not just seeing the Gulf Coast being hit and not just seeing Florida being hit, but they're now experiencing it in the North and in the Midwest and on the West Coast. And they're finally understanding this is a real thing, but they're still in the anger stage, in the denial stage. And you have people who are coming from all around the world who have been through all of the different stages of grief to the point where they're just shutting down and fleeing and trying to find a safe place. And so we have antagonism and angst brewing right here as a result of these two different kinds of griefs and two different stages of griefs, but it's all the same thing. It's all eco grief. And so I just wanted to, I know I was very happy that everybody understood eco grief, but I just wanted to give the outlying effects of why and how eco grief impacts us. It's not just breaking our heart. It has the potential of breaking our society in how one human treats another. Because people grieving hurt each other as well as hurt themselves. And so when we, in my mission and part of my work, when I do international work and I go into those rooms and I say, hey, it's all well and good that you're planning to give funding and do something about this in 2035. But will there be anybody willing to get out of bed and go to work and toil along broken up roads and flooded streets to get to that one industry that you saved by the time 2035 comes around? Because we saw what a toll a global world suffering can have when we saw the effect of COVID. We had 1.5 years of lockdown, and we had people quitting their jobs, families breaking up, high rates of suicide, people just saying it's not worth it. And that was just after 1.5 years. So I ask you, and I'm way over time, but I'll ask you now to end on some hope. It doesn't all have to be hopeless. Everything I said is true. It's beyond a cycle. It's beyond everything. It encompasses everything. But there's always ways to help grief. There's agency. Do something about this. You're on this call, so you're already doing something about this. So I won't preach to the choir about that, but doing something about it helps. Encourage others to do something about it. And you know what I do? I enjoy it while it's here. I go see it. I take pictures. I go to different places. And anytime somebody puts me on a plane for work, I take a couple of days and I try to take a couple of days if I can afford it. And I go see something else and I go catalog the beauty of the world as God gave us. And I make sure I see it and I experience it with my own eyes while I can. And then I tell other people about it and I tell people to go experience it and see it, because you know what happens when people appreciate things? They start caring about it and they start fighting for it. So let's start fighting for it and enjoying this world so that other people could see our joy and enjoyment of it, so that we could use the joy to fight the grief, to inspire us to get up, to reconnect and remember why this is so precious, not just because this is what we're used to, but because it's actually precious and beautiful and lovely to behold and lovely to experience. So let's go out and experience it and share the joy of that experience so that we have more than grief in our hearts. We have purpose, we have love, we have protection, and let that help fuel us as we continue to fight for the world that we want to live in. Thank you.
Amen, Rev Dallas. And let's go on and take a few questions now, because I'd hate for folk to save their questions and maybe forget them till the end. So let's take a few minutes and let y'all ask questions and make comments. And I'm thinking of my coworker Sarissa right now because Sarissa's passion and profession involve mental health. So would love to get Sarissa's thoughts too.
Well, thanks for putting me on the spot, Cal. But Rev, that really actually that touched my heart. I actually looked at my mom and I said, wow, because people don't think about how much it affects you, you know, with mental health. And I just wrote something about that. And I actually had never, everybody remember, be patient with me. I'm new to all this. So I had never heard of eco grief. So I didn't have a name to those things where you can't go back to those special places because it was wiped out and different things like that. But like, you know, what we're from a very, very country town. Well, my family is called Preco. And we can't go back because, you know, storms happen down in the Mugga Way and all that. I know none, all y'all aren't from here, so let me quit. But down that way, all those storms happen and knock things out. So it just made me think of those things and like those graves we can't get to. And so that really, really touched my heart. And it was a wonderful, you did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Sarissa. Any other questions for Rev Dallas? Well, if you think of them, there'll be time for more Q&A at the end. Then let's switch our camera over to Ms. Jan Booher with Unitarian Universalist Justice Florida. Please tell us a little more about yourself too.
Well, thank you. I kind of wanted to show you the kind of work that that I do and that we do here in Florida. Here in Florida, you know, much as there was a Dust Bowl in the 1930s where people had to leave their farms, we have this going on here in Florida and have had it for several years. And every hurricane we have, those people who are at the margins end up being unhoused. And it's very traumatic for the people who are in these situations. And so we are working to address it in several ways. So I'd like to share with you some of our work. Let me see why that is not showing me the screen I wanted to show me. Just a second. Okay, let's see if I can get there. But so I have a very special relationship with the people in the Panhandle around Panama City. I embedded with folk who were bringing in the body bags at the beginning when that Cat 5 Hurricane Michael hit in 2018. I was involved in establishing a cold chain to be able to bring 250,000 pounds of chicken into the area and get it cooked through largely through faith communities that were helping folk out when nobody had any power. So I have an interesting relationship with the folk there. And over a year after Hurricane Michael, I was still working with the people there. And these are the folks that we were working with locally there at the time, Lead Coalition of Bay County. And we asked our human rights arm, which is the UU Service Committee, to partner up with us at the Unitarian Universalist Justice Florida on a photo voice project, because we were being told that the students in this area were feeling that nobody's hearing, well, even the adults were feeling it. You know, we're left to our own devices. Nobody's hearing us. Nobody's listening. Nobody knows, as it turns out, the way the kids felt. We were heroes. We did things that we couldn't believe we did, and nobody knows it, of the way that they helped in the response to the storm. And so all of these things were being told to us. We said, well, let's at least give people a way of being able to give themselves, you know, help give people voice. So UUSC responded and framed our human rights work as working with the displaced youth to allow them to tell their stories post-Hurricane Michael, and that we were partnering with people who were displaced from that natural disaster, and they felt that they were definitely overlooked by their governments in the recovery efforts. Since then, we have found out that there was a lot of, you know, fraud, and the monies were under the table and so forth and so on that were intended to go there. But these are some of the students that we worked with in the area. And our process was to begin with workshops, and we did storytelling workshops. And we talked about superheroes. We talked about all kinds of things about when people tell stories, what are the elements of those stories, and what do you think is important in those elements of stories that has to do with your experience that you had. And then the students were taught how to use cameras. They were taught concepts that had to do with getting good photographs, working on composition and so forth, lighting and so forth. And then they had a gallery at their school, and they had other students from the school, as well as we had tremendous support from the counselors, the school counselors, the people who were working with the students psychologically and so forth. And we were working in an alternative school where there were already at-risk students. So we had tremendous support from the faculty. And then we had an art museum, a gallery that was a wonderful exhibit at the local museum. And the students' pictures, which were on canvas, had the little labels that had QR codes, and they were able to talk about why they took the particular pictures and whatever they wanted to say about those pictures, and people could hear about it. But I'll give you an idea about eco-grief. So the student who chose to take this picture, this was like a she shed that her grandma had, that she kept all of the things that her grandbabies had done and all of the things that were family memories from all of the different events the family had had over the years. Everybody's wedding was all in here, and the roof blew off, and all of those family memories and everything that was embodied in that family in those pictures and things was destroyed. This was a picture that a young man took, and it's interesting that it's kind of off, a kilter, and that's the way he wanted it to be. Because since the storm, he was not able to be living in the home. He was living in the car. He had a job. He was working, helping clean up the debris. But this was about the fact that their livelihood, the way that they were doing things, the chickens that they depended on for their eggs and so forth, they hadn't had the time to be able to rebuild and do the things that had to be done because they had to earn the money, which they were doing from cleaning up other people's property as it was, but they were being paid to do it. This is about a place that a year later, the student walks past every day. It still has no roof, and this was a year after, and there was a tent around the back. He took another picture of the tent where the people were living, and it was about how cold the people were and how it didn't seem right that they couldn't, he said that some people seem like they get helped and other people don't, and everybody should be helped. And these people still had the problem with their roof. This was somebody that had loss of home, and this was part of that. But this was her happy place because it's the place where the home stood. And she would come here and sit in her chair, and it's her happy place. This was a place that a girl who was molested in a shelter walked back 5 miles to this place to stay in one of these kind of mobile homes that had been somewhat demolished because she felt safer there. It had no roof or anything, but she said home it was here. And she came back to be in that home because she was not safe in the shelter. She couldn't, it wasn't protected there. This is a wonderful story of hope where the roof caved in when family was here and nobody was hurt and everybody got out into the safe places in the house when this occurred. So you see all different kinds of things, but I'll show you the kind of reception that we had in the community with this. Let's see if we can get this going here.
In Bay District schools this past year has been a difficult time because of Hurricane Michael. So Rosenwald High School held a coming of age in the Eye of Michael photo voiced exhibit today to help students heal by showcasing photos they took following the storm. For senior Jemiah Forward, part of her exhibit was a picture of her dad who passed away from injuries suffered as a result of the hurricane. Jemiah says being able to tell her story through pictures made it an easier way to talk about a painful experience.
It made me feel good because people can know, because most people don't really know what actually happened and stuff. So they can see, like, from the people that were actually in it, they can see their point of view.
Now, many of the exhibits showed pictures of students' damaged homes in neighborhoods.
So I
For many
just-
students
I
in Bay
just-
District school,
Let me get rid of this from.
for many students in Bay District schools this past year has
Okay, so I wanted to say that they didn't say this about Jemiah. Her father was incarcerated. There was mold and sewage in the jail. He became ill and he died. And so she is dealing with the burden of that, and also the fact that no one will call that out. You notice on the news, they talked about her father died of injuries. Her father died because he was incarcerated and they didn't take care of the people who were in the jail. So after the students did that work, then we took them to Tallahassee, to the state capitol. This was in the rotunda of the state capitol where they were able to bring their pictures. They were able to talk about their experience. There was a student forum at which they asked why there couldn't be funding to help in the people's homes, even if they didn't have money, especially if they had children who were asthmatics, who were having a hard time with the kinds of indoor air quality issues they were having. And then they were invited by their elected official to be engaged in some planning that was going on, that was going to be able to give them a seat at the table. So that was another way that they could be heard. And so that work is available on the hashtag Life After Michael on YouTube. That has the different stories that the folks tell about their pictures. And it gave them a feeling of voice with their colleagues at school, voice to adults who are associated with the school, and then more broadly in the community. They also, during the pandemic, when everyone was locked in their houses, they did something called the eye SOAR, the eye like your eyeball, but SOAR, SOAR, and they projected the art on the sides of buildings and people could drive past it. And they did the children's art. They projected the art that these folks had made. So that was all one thing. So that's about eco-grief and the kind of loss they were dealing with, and our attempt to give them voice and to make them feel that they were being heard. The climate migration work that we're doing, we're working with Christ the King Episcopal Church and of course our UUSC human rights colleagues on this. This was about being able to document what people were going through when they had come from Puerto Rico to the US. And so Christ the King Episcopal Church, some of you know Father Jose, who has been on a couple of our calls. And so he has been working with these people, and we wanted to capture this before they moved on. And what was so important about this, I want you to I'll play a portion of this particular interview. All of the interviews we did, we said, we want to put this totally in your hands culturally, however you would do these interviews, culturally, however you want to do the editing of them. And then the UUSC language justice team gave us the captions on them. And everybody who was interviewed wanted to be interviewed in Spanish, even though, as you'll see, some of them speak English quite well. But that's the language that they chose. They are, keep this in mind, these people from Puerto Rico are American citizens. Keep that in mind when you listen to this interview. And I won't play the whole thing for you, but enough that we can have you understand this.
Javier Figueroa, Manatí, Puerto Rico, maestro de inglés.
¿Cuándo llegaste?
En noviembre 6, 2017.
¿A dónde llegaste?
Llegué al aeropuerto de Orlando. En ese momento nos ubicamos en el área de Lake Buenavista. La familia se ubicó allí costeando un hotel.
¿Fuiste asistido por FEMA?
Fuimos asistidos por FEMA, sí. Después fuimos cambiados. Nos cambiamos de Lake Buenavista, nos cambiamos al área de Altamonte Spring, a un hotel costeado por FEMA.
¿Cuánto tiempo te tomó encontrar vivienda?
Bueno, fue un proceso rápido, apresurado y que no estábamos preparados, ¿verdad? Económicamente para ese empuje tan rápido, pero lo tuvimos que hacer en menos de 3 meses. Yo diría ya que para cuando estuvimos con FEMA, ese mes de que FEMA nos costeó ese hotel, ya tuvimos que rápido buscar un apartamento. Yo diría que ya para febrero ya teníamos nuestro apartamento.
¿Has experimentado algún tipo de prejuicio o de rechazo?
Sí, estábamos en la incertidumbre de que el nene se iba a quedar sin asistir a la escuela. Mi nene tiene de educación especial. Fue diagnosticado con autismo, tiene un grado de autismo y tiene un atraso de 53 meses de su edad, lo cual rápido lo buscamos el sitio cerca de una escuela y tuvimos rápido que llegamos a la escuela, tuvimos un inconveniente en la escuela porque mi hijo venía de un país diferente y no querían darle las ayudas pertinentes que todo niño con esa condición merece.
Desde que estás aquí, ¿qué ha sido lo más difícil que han tenido que experimentar?
Pues yo diría el acostumbrarnos al trato, digo yo, de ciudadanía de segunda mano, ya que somos ciudadanos americanos, pero cuando venimos aquí nos creemos que nos van a tratar igual y no es correcto. Somos tratados diferentes, quizás no con las mismas privilegios, ¿verdad? Que el americano que vive aquí. Los requisitos para mudarte a un apartamento son demasiado exigentes en cuanto al ingreso. Prácticamente el poder establecerte esos primeros años son sumamente difíciles.
Alguien que
So that's what I wanted to share with you all to kind of help you see the kinds of issues that people who are actually American citizens and speak another language are having when they come here to Central Florida. And when I went to one of the meetings that had the academics that were working on and analyzing what kinds of problems these folks were having when they were arriving from Puerto Rico, I did learn some very interesting things. And one of them was the cultural differences between the ways that families relate to the teachers. There's so much a part of their family when they're in Puerto Rico and when they came here. One of the things that they were able to do in some of the schools was to hire some of the teachers from Puerto Rico to be able to teach those students who were arriving from Puerto Rico. They had much better outcomes. But this business that he was talking about having to go from one apartment to another at the beginning very quickly, because the FEMA business runs out and they never know if they're going to have it, has children being by themselves in these apartments during the day. Their parents are out working to try to make this money so that they can have the first and last month's rent and so forth in those next apartments. And we have people who are priests and they are rescuing girls who are trafficked because they thought cross-culturally that they had their first boyfriend, and they turned out to be taken somewhere else, Miami or whatever. And I think these people that are Father Jose and Father Huber and the others at Christ the King are true heroes. They have actually gotten in their cars and gone down there and brought these girls back from these horrible situations. And it's really because it really is economic. It's really because the parents have to work and nobody's there with the kids. So there are a lot of issues, and I can only imagine what it's like for I'm not documenting what it's like for immigrants from actually, they're not American citizens, because these folks are. So that's what I wanted to kind of share with you all today, and so that you can see what we have going on in Central Florida and in the Panhandle.
Wow, Jan. I can't think of anything better than a moment of silence. But I would like to open it up for questions and comments.
I do want to say something that I learned when we did the photo voice when I started it, and I did interviews with these young people, and they're in an alternative school. They did amazing things during the hurricane. The young men were asked, like some of them were in their churches, and the doors were beginning to be sucked out. And they were part of a chain of the strongest people they could get in the room to hold the doors closed. And they have that. And I heard that from more than one person, that they were on one of those things, trying to keep either the roof down or the doors on. And it did something to these people. It made them grow up in such an astounding fashion that we decided, we changed part of what we're doing. We called it Coming of Age in the Eye of Michael, as opposed to just life after Michael, because they were showing us pictures. We expected them to go take pictures of where they were at the moment, but some of them, they insisted on showing us the pictures they took at the time, because they said, I took care of my 4 sisters. We stayed in the bathroom and I kept them safe. I mean, and these were people that stepped up in all kinds of ways. They helped rescue people that were stranded. They did all kinds of things, and they were teenagers. And it turned them all into little philosophers. They talked about how home is where you feel comfortable. Home is where you feel loved. If it is in your school and you feel comfortable and loved, it is your home. If it is your church and you feel comfortable and loved, it is your home. It is not the things, it is the people. And I was hearing this from 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds who were labeled with this alternative school label. And I was just astounded by who they were and the quality of their thoughts. So I just wanted to share that.
Wow. Definitely 2 speakers with amazing and powerful stories. Any questions for our panelists? And if not, while you're thinking, I just want to say just a few words about From Resilience to Restoration and how our initiative ties into this subject. From Resilience to Restoration is our People's Justice Council's first federal grant. It's from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And it's for this topic we call From Resilience to Restoration. What's up with that? Well, like the wise old coach says, you can't win if you play a purely defensive game. We're all working on resilience, but we know we must move from resilience to restoration if we are going to avoid these kinds of calamities in the future. There's and our restoration plans, we're working with frontline communities, especially houses of faith and frontline communities, but not limited to them, to create restoration plans that include at least 3 components: an ecological component, an economic component, and of course, when we're talking frontline communities, restoration is probably not the best word for the economy. We need to elevate the economy to a level it's never been. And then we're talking, since People's Justice Council is an interfaith organization, we are talking ecumenical restoration, because a lot of toxic theology has gone into creating the problems politically and otherwise that we are dealing with now, these prejudices and so forth. So that is our game plan. That is what we are working on. Jan is our, this is a Gulf State grant, I should say. Jan is our Florida partner, Jan and UU Justice Florida. I see we have Rev. Emily on the call. So we have our Louisiana partner with Green the Church. And I'm scanning, hope I'm not missing anybody else that's on the call, but would like to also pause and let Jan and or Rev. Emily say a little bit about what's going on in their states in terms of From Resilience to Restoration.
Well, I could start that off. I just want to say, well, Rev was here and they did some documentary interviews and such. But we've started our planning process and it's been very interesting. We had also people who applied for the EPA Environmental Justice Grant. So those things are meshing together because that required a lot of thinking about what priorities were. But we have a tremendous amount in the area that I showed you where we did photo voice in the Panhandle. They decided that they are very interested in not just doing, you know, like the CERT, the Citizens Emergency Response Teams, but that they want to help the businesses to be engaged with it, because one of the things that they experienced was that the businesses did not come back. And that was why a lot of people left. They simply couldn't get the things they needed. So that they call it BERTs, right, and CERTs. And so part of their economic restoration is how can we connect to the community and the businesses and be able to make that support there so the businesses can come back and be more resilient. So that was an interesting piece of that. The people who are in the rural area want to do workforce and clean energy, and they had have an application in that would enable them to help with the homeless issue. They want to take in the building that they were able to purchase for $1 because of the divestment, where all of the students had to go to integrated schools and the Black schools were closed down. The people who are still there, who went to middle school there, and the ladies who are in their 80s and 90s who stood in front of the bulldozers and would not allow those schools to be bulldozed, want to have the 5 of those classrooms to be available to the homeless, and they want to have them clean energy equipped. And so that is part of a workforce effort then, once they have these clean energy you know, equipment and the technology in there that people can learn. And they have the Art of Manhood mentorship program, and they have other programs, and they'll be able to have people, they'll provide temporary housing with internships so that people can learn and move forward. And then one other piece of this is where Rev, you know, Father Jose is, that he really has a vision of bringing light to the neighborhood, right? Having light that they can have the power to go to the neighborhood, and they have 2 churches near them, and they want to have those 2 churches to be able to have spotlights to help them whenever the power is out. If they can do this with clean energy on their building, and then to be able to illuminate these areas so those other churches can also serve the community. And they're working on getting their Healing Hunger food pantry to be completely microgrid islandable so that they can serve that community continuously. And they also want to do workforce work there. So people are combining the ecological and the economic by wanting to reduce greenhouse gases and using ways that are tied to workforce to do it. So it's interesting.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Reverend Emily Carroll. Thank you, Kyle, for this moment. And I serve as the National Field Director for Greenville Church National. And so we are excited to be a part of this federal plan. There's often a quote that I like to use by Marian Wright Elderman, and she has this prayer that she wrote in this book. She's an activist. She's one for education and children. And it goes, God help me to be like bamboo, that bends and bows and sways, but never breaks. And so because of that, I like it because it speaks about something that God created, which is bamboo. It speaks about a substance that does a lot of bending, that does a lot of swaying, that has to be flexible and has to move and bend, but it never breaks. And so we see ourselves at Greenville Church supporting a people who have to bend and break, bend and bow and sway, people who often have to be flexible with the changing times, especially as we relate to this dynamic of climate change. And so we're excited to be a part of, from resilience to restoration, some of the projects that we're working on as we work with houses of faith that are ecumenical and interfaith dynamic, Baptist, United Methodist, most are of the Protestant faith, but of various denominations. And so when we work with them, one of the projects that we're working on that is in tandem with this restoration plan under the People's Justice Council is one of helping and assisting churches as it relates to solar panels and energy hubs. We have a project we're working on in Alexandria with the church signing up to get solar panels, and not only solar panels, but EV charging stations, all with this dynamic of being resourceful, having this mind of, in essence, preparedness for when they are not able to be on the grid, all with this dynamic of being that place of faith that people go to, and prayerfully that faith, that place of energy that people will be able to go to in the near future. And so we are working with churches in different areas as it relates to ecological and also economic, and within this space of ecumenical and culture. It's so important for us to retain the culture of a people. And listening to Ms. Brown earlier talking about the grief of not being able to visit a gravesite, not being able to go to a place of history, of heritage, because of climate change, because of these disasters that are taking place. One project that we're working with is Mount St. Mark Baptist Church, in helping to do some things with the graveyard, where the front end is very well maintained, but the back end seems to be slowly, I won't say it's going anywhere, but we have noticed the level reducing, and some movement of some things that are happening, that we know that there's the technology. We know that that graveyard can be brought back to par. It houses, or it holds individuals, African-Americans who fought in the Civil War. And so we are just excited to serve and excited about being a part of this grant program. And also just excited to be a part of this dialogue, to recognize the eco-grief, to recognize the grief. I think about the disadvantage, I think about the injustice, I think about the despair, but hadn't really thought about this dynamic of grief and loss, and how detrimental it can be as individuals suffer. And the prayer is to do as much that we can to reduce the carbon footprint, to reduce the fact that our earth is warming much faster than it needs to be. Thank you, Cal, for this moment.
Thank you, Rev. Emily. So while our topic is eco-grief, I hope the message that you all are leaving with is one of hope. I believe Devin Wright had to drop off, but I'll read for those who haven't seen it. He put a nice message in the chat. Thank you to the panelists and the convener. I appreciate all of your work and sharing. I'm really excited to be talking more openly about climate grief, especially climate grief along the Gulf Coast. It is a personal struggle for me, and I definitely need community around dealing with these big and real feelings. Happy to stay in touch with folks and develop deep understanding and analysis around climate grief and anxiety. I'm Devin, and I work with an agricultural technical assistance nonprofit in Southeast Louisiana, but we also do a lot of work in climate justice in a variety of coalitions. I have to go, but thank you all again for creating this space and naming big feelings that are part of the work and our reality. And Devin's got his email there. Thank you, Devin. And thank you all. One last call for questions or comments before I give you the rest of your evening. Well, please, a virtual round of applause to our wonderful panelists, speakers, partners, and to all of you guests. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here with us tonight. Cheers and thanks, everybody.
Hey, excellent.
Dr. Bob, glad you could join us.
Thank you, buddy.